I really enjoyed this season. I think the whole Stranger Things, each season gets better and better. This one being the best at the moment for so many reasons. First of all, I think they stepped up on the horror and violence element, just being utter gory and just really quite dark and vicious. And when it comes to CGI, I think that's been a real step up as we see the Upside Down, and it looks fucking terrifying. Even though this show has a lot of horror and quite emotional scenes throughout the entire series and the show, it was always able to keep the comedy, which this season is no exception. It did an amazing job with the comedy, and it never felt like it was out of the ordinary or it didn't fit in place. It was great. With this season, they did a great amount of character development. We see Max, who after the events of season 3 decides to somewhat become a loner and isolates herself away from those who really cared about her, like Lucas, for example. We see new characters like Eddie, who comes in and makes an amazing first impression with his attitude and the energy he brings off, and he just really became a character favourite, at least for me anyway. And so it was really great to see him being more into the show as it progressed, and just seeing him get involved with the gang and learning about Hawkins as a whole and his way of dealing with it. He was a great element to the team. We also get to see the original characters, obviously, and we see Dustin just being his ordinary nerdy self and really accepting his nerdism and not caring that it would alienate him, and really being focused into that, being somewhat happy that he finds others that like that, such as Eddie. And it's quite cool that he's accepting his nerdism, enjoying that, being cool with it, unlike Lucas, who feels like he doesn't want to be perceived as a nerd and tries to be on the basketball team and hang out with the kids on there. And whilst he does get accepted by them after the first episode, he realises that he doesn't really like these people and that they're not the smartest people, as they believe that all the horrible stuff that's happening in Hawkins is because of Dungeons and Dragons, religious cults and demons. And I think it's a great take on the way people are easily manipulated by the media back then and especially nowadays. When it comes to other characters, we see Eleven, who from the get-go is writing letters and lying to Mike about her amazing experiences in LA, as she in reality is just the same social outcast that she's always been. And it's quite sad to see that she is still treated like that, and she comes off as quite a nice and kind person, which makes it all the much better to see her get her revenge, even if it does come with serious repercussions afterwards. With Eleven, we also get to see her childhood and see her growing up in that medical facility with her papa. And again, it's quite sad to see that she was always been the social outcast, even in an area like that. And we get to see her and developing her powers, and even though she has gotten to an extent the use of her powers, it doesn't stop her from being severely bullied by the other kids. When it comes to the plot, I have to say hands down the best plot is with Steve, Nancy, Eddie, Robin, Dustin, Lucas, his sister, and Max, as their plot is very interesting as they go investigate a recent murder and connect it to an old family murder case that happened in the late 60s, I believe, I could be wrong. And in a way it connects to Vecna and the Upside Down, and they not only kind of figure out how the Upside Down happened, but they also go into the Upside Down, something we haven't seen the characters do before, so they're entering new territory, which is really quite interesting to see. Somewhat going out of their own element and investigating the unknown. As well as that, we also get to find out how the Upside Down was created and who or what was responsible, and we also find out Eleven's connection to the Upside Down. Now, this show does use romance, but not in a corny or kind of boring way that most shows do, and I actually enjoyed seeing it, which is actually unusual as I'm not the biggest romance guy. When it comes to Joyce and Hopper, it was actually quite nice to see him have this somewhat connection, and whilst it gets a bit serious, nothing wrong with that, it's actually quite nice to see. And we also get a somewhat subtle moment with Robin and a girl she fancies called Vicky. And even though it's like the most subtle way, it's still quite nice and enjoyable to see. Within this entire show, I feel like there's two themes that are subtly exploring. The first being trauma and the discussion around it, as we see all of Vecna's victims have some trauma in their life and it's not something they like to talk about. And Max being the worst of them, as like I said earlier, she alienated herself from everyone else who could possibly help her with the trauma that she's going through. The other theme is family, as we finally see Eleven kind of love and accept her dad, who did quite horrific things. It was all in a way of trying to better herself, and in a loving way. He was always going to protect her, and he wanted to make sure that she had the powers to fight off the upside down Vecna monster. And we even see that he will literally protect her, even sacrificing himself for her. When it also family moments, we see Will and Jonathan have this real heart-to-heart moment in the last two episodes, as he feels like they've been distanced from each other. Will hanging around Eleven a lot and kind of being somewhat away from everyone else, but we also see Jonathan, who's really the social outcast, as he's just spent most of his days in the purple haze. My criticisms, when it comes to plots, I have to be 100% honest, I feel like the adults were lacking in this particular season, which is a real shame, as they were always quite up there with plots, usually being either the second best or near first. And it's a shame, except for Hopper, I really didn't think the adult plots lines were that interesting. Hopper always being the exception, he always brings a lot of interest and violence and the surprising emotional scene. I feel like it wasn't until about episode 7 onwards that the adults actually started to become more interesting. But not to say that adults were the only ones who were lacking interesting plots. I thought Mike and Eleven started off okay, but once they separated and Eleven did her own thing, I felt Mike dramatically and drastically became the least interesting characters, or that setting being the least interesting of the entire show. Now, I think there was a particular scene that Mike, Jonathan, Will and his stoner buddy, there was an amazing scene within there, but afterwards it just felt like it was somewhat filler, and whilst adding small bits to the plot, wasn't anything huge. My last critique is the way they were, in my opinion, trying to make Steve and Nancy a particular thing again. And whilst I understand that Steve still has emotions for Nancy, it's understandable, they were in a long relationship, I personally thought it was an injustice to the relationship they were already building with Nancy, that being with Jonathan, who started off with just being friends in season 1 to being very close and actually getting into a relationship in season 2 and season 3. And so I want to see that relationship bloom, not kind of being reversed and going back to stage 1, which was Steve and Nancy. That's just how I feel. But overall, I think this is a fantastic watch, and whilst I'm a tad annoyed they separated the last 2 episodes from the original 7, it's definitely worth the wait, as it was such a great 4 hours of watching, and cannot wait to see the last season of Stranger Things and any spin-offs or continuations the Duffer Brothers plan up in the future. Is it good? I'd say it's fucking fantastic. Definitely one of the best shows of 2022 so far. And if I had to rate it, I would definitely say it's an easily 9 out of 10. Recommendations, now obviously Stranger Things as a whole is inspired and influenced by so much, and I'm just going to go through a few of those, what I definitely 100% believe they took influence from, and some may disagree, some may not. So obviously the first thing first, with the creatures and the horror-esque way of movement, I would say John Carpenter's The Thing, which was mentioned in Stranger Things, and sadly to say didn't get the love it deserved when it initially came out, but since then has gone and grown a huge following, becoming a cult classic. That's a pattern with a lot of John Carpenter films, apart from Halloween. Another film I would say is Alien, or Aliens, as the Demogorgons the way they move and their creepiness and the way their mouths open reminds me of facehuggers. Again, definitely can see the resemblance. When it comes to Vecna in particular with season 4, I would definitely say a mixture between Nightmare on Elm Street and Friday the 13th. I say Friday the 13th because of his look and the way he walks and his pacing. It's very horror-esque and reminds me of Jason Voorhees. Nightmare on Elm Street, not only because the actor who originally played Freddy is in the TV show playing Vecna's dad at a later age when they visit him in prison or mental institution, but because of his powers and the way he's able to get into people's dreams, well, into their mind states and creating this somewhat horror-esque dream state. Brilliant. I would say Event Horizon as the way they go into a polar opposite, a somewhat upside down if you will, of the universe they're in, into the spaceship. Definitely a great film, another film that got panned by the critics but later had its cult following. Silent Hill, the games, definitely 1 as well as 2, with not only the creatures but going into the same world, same town if it is, but the upside down version, that very horror-esque, bloody on the walls type shit. Definitely recommend that. Now, obviously because it's about children in a horror-esque world, I'm going to recommend It, the TV movie version with Tim Curry. I think that's better, personally. I would recommend Stand By Me. Again, Stephen King definitely has an influence on Stranger Things. You can see one of them was reading a Stephen King book. I think in the last episode, couldn't be wrong. But with the kids and their influence, their quite strong language and just their personalities, you can see somewhat the resemblance. A PG version, if you will, of the Stand By Me kids, definitely. And last but not least, I recommend the film Super 8, the J.J. Abrams alien film. It's very good, definitely interesting, and you can see where they get the influence of Stranger Things comes from. But again, that film's also set in the 70s/80s, so you can see what I mean. Alright, that's all I have to say on the matter. Hope you enjoyed the review, hope you go watch the show and some of the recommendations. Have a good day.